Yeah, so let's start this. Doing exact thing that one's parent did, but hoping that there will be a different result. You know, and a whole lot of us are trapped in this matrix of not necessarily doing a different thing, but exactly the same thing that our parents did, and we are hoping, seriously hoping that by His mercy, what God cannot do does not exist, right? That is going to be different. No, no. Before you hope that it's going to be different, can you sit down and analyze the things that your parents did? Analyze it. Yes. Yeah, you are not going to be the first person to believe that what God cannot do does not exist. You are not the first generation to believe that your answer to every problem is to pray about it. You are not. You know, I guess where the issue is as for majority of us, we are not trained to think and to take stocks, to analyze, to dissect things that have happened. We have been given this illusion that we are special, that is on our own case and on our own turn, that the game will change. And there is nothing called special. It's a construct. People are not victims today because they aren't special. People are not less just because they ain't special. There is nothing called that. That is a construct, meaning something that is not true, but that was designed to be sold to people to believe. It's a construct, it's human construct. So the question we should all ask ourselves is that what are we doing differently from what our parents did? For some of you, you still want to line up behind the so-called polluters, you know, take their money, thinking that you are actually now different from the role some of your parents played in becoming a tout, in speaking for the people who would or who has continuously, loot our national treasury. No, no. And you think it's going to be different in another 30 years. That was exactly what your parents thought. Some of you think you're going to, and this is not a moral justice, but saying that you are not going to do anything about the system, but you're going to scam your way out of the system. This is exactly what your parents also thought about. This is not new. There is no eureka moment to any generation. Exactly. In fact, if we study this crime and the scam industry of Nigeria, you would realize that what we have now is no longer scam. This is child's play to people selling a whole airport that doesn't exist to a different national treasury, to the point of looting a whole country treasury without internet, for people who sold institutions. You will realize by all standards, negative or positive, that that is not the answer. So you are not going to continue on the path, on the exact same path that your parents took, and think you would wish your answers to be different. That land, that fantasy land, doesn't exist in actual reality. It doesn't. So what must we do is to create a different experiences that will now lead to different realities for us. Different experiences from our parents. Our parents decided to turn God's way. Kumuyi led the prayer in 1980 and 1983 for the nation. because that's what actually inspired this life. I just saw a punch news that some persons can is doing the same thing and people are trooping in. You are not special. You think you are special, you are just a slave. Another slave without any form of specialty. We are not special. People create systems that then now guarantees that they are treated differently. I saw another charlatan, Oyedepo, you know, he won't tell me just realizing that the African race has no dignity. He won't tell me just realizing that, but he think he could escape that by going individual, and that's what some of us, that's what some parents played. That we think we could solve a systemic problem by finding our own path. It is not special. What have you realized now is that the same problem they abandoned, came back to meet them and to meet them in multiple folds, because we could have solved our systemic problem when we had lesser population. But guess what? We now have more population. We now have more persons living in this side of the world. Unfortunately, we've created more problems for ourselves. You are not special. And stop, is a construct for the slaves to think that the God would do anything for them. Why? It's a construct. It's a construct of the slaves. When your reality, when your material reality is speaking otherwise, when your material reality is saying that you could be a victim at any point or any time, that you're not safe. But just because, some of us are waiting for us to experience it. No. I read a book long time ago, and the book said in it that if you make the exact same mistake that people have made before, but they have turned or converted into writings, or they have documented one way or the other, and you make the exact same mistake, then you are stupid. He didn't say that you are not aware, whether you are aware or not. You cannot afford to make the exact same mistake and call yourself human. That's stupidity. Our parents, if there is something that God cannot do, this your supreme being cannot do, our parents would have delivered that on that result. But guess what? It didn't deliver that. But unfortunately, slaves being trained by slaves would have committed the slave sons and slave daughters to continue on the path that led them into captives, that got them captured in the first place. And that's why you're not thinking. That's why you think you can still continue on that path without any form of reasoning to this at all. No, you have to change the experiences. We have to. And without us changing the experiences, without us changing our practices, our process, then we'll continually be in this point. But guess what? It will be double calamity, because slaves too still consider owning lives, giving birth to new lives as some measure of achievement. And that is problem multiplication. That at least if only one slave give birth to four, that is four problems. One raised to power four. A slave giving birth to four children is one raised to power four. And imagine that in your own case, you only had one raised to power. Let's say in your parents' time, at your parent time, they only had one raised to power one. Now you have you now have one raised to power two. That for every potential solution or thinking person, I don't actually believe that there is a thinking person within this space. I don't. I do not assume that there is any thinking person. Thinking people will not create a space like this and consider introducing new lives without fixing it first. That's not a thinking human. That's not thinking human. So I do not consider. But let's now assume, because slaves pride themselves in their pseudo dignity, in their fake dignity. They pride themselves in their pseudo dignity. They want to assume the position that they are not. That is why you would often hear among slaves, don't you know who I am? They know who they really are. They know that there is no identity behind them, but they want to post what they do not have. So let's assume that there was one solution to one problem. For every two human, there is one solution and there is one problem at or during your parents' time. Now let's assume that the problem has raised to power two. There is one solution and two problems. Imagine if these other two now give birth to four. That is, there is to every solution, potential solution, there is four problems to solve. And we must not continue on that path. And for us not to continue on that same path, we must begin to analyze the things that our parents did that didn't get them results. And we must deviate from it. Simple. Our parents follow some particular politicians. They follow some set of polluters that turned to be ruiners of our space. We must, we must, depart from such. We must do everything to make sure that we are not replicating the same problem. Because if we do, we would have the same problem, even raised to power more than they had. And that is where we should be working on. We should not be working on replicating or intensifying things that does not work or that do not work. If our parents for once knew that religion was going to get to a point where their religion will be selling foreign citizenship as the way of achievement to us, they would not. They were not that daft. In 1980, if our parents were being told that for them to have any meaning to survival, because it's just survival, that they would have to escape the land, they would not follow religion. What God cannot do will not even have crowd, to talk of 5,000 people abandoning their homeland in a foreign land, thinking that because they could fill a stadium of something that if they are thinking, they will know that this is problem. Thinking that justifies God in their life. Meanwhile, that reenact failed system, a failed system, a failed drug. That reenact what they have to abandon, that they literally have to get out of their own skin and their land just to eat, just to feed. That's problem. But slaves, at what point does a slave consider, not owning a thing of pride, right? At what point? That's just what a slave wants. You just want to own, not master, not invent, not create. A slave is not interested about creating an enabling environment, not for just himself, but for the entirety of human race, for the entirety of his generation beyond him. A slave is not bothered. A slave just want to eat. He just want to have his physiological needs met. And we are still thinking like slaves, even though the chains is no longer visible. But the chains of the mental chains is still there and it's still as strong as the visible one. It's time for you to break this cycle. It's a negative cycle. Like they will say in the place where I come from, in the part of Africa that I come from, that ìran méjì ò ń tòṣì or ìran mẹ́ta ò ń tòṣì, meaning three generations consecutively do not end up the same and the exact way. But we've realized that is actually not totally true, because they could end up exactly the same way if they do not alter the process. And that is what Nigerians and Africans of today are proving to be true. That if they continue on the same process, on the same process of consuming drugs that were given to them that had not delivered on the proposed um, deliverables to them, they would end up, and they would even end up more worse than they were. And that is what our environment is proving to us. But guess what? These drugs would have turned us into something less than human, because we would not even be able to think again to now assess where we've come and how short we've come. That people do not think that is madness. That a son of a wealthy person is now eating with the beast of the earth, but he still consider it as God favoring him in an unknown land. It's not that he's controlling the unknown land. It's not that he's doing land grabber like some of their progenitors did. It's not. They are not doing land grabber. They are not controlling anything. They are not controlling resource. They are just happy to be slaves in an unknown land, to feast like less than animals. And they will even gather themselves, pay for the fee to gather themselves in an open air concentration camp and call that God. What kind of humans does that? What kind of human does that? How far can we go as a continent and as a race? How far? But this is the generation that will go that far in destroying themselves if they do not take clues, if they fail to study what the parents did and adjust and make adjustment. So that is my plea. I would say plea, right? To begin to look at what your parents did and to begin to see that you are not special. You are not special. It's a construct sold for the slaves to feel high in spite of its material state. If you're actually special, there should be visible results. But you're not. You are the beggars of the earth. Africans, as we are right now, we beg everywhere we go. To get access, we have to beg. We have become beggars. And it's time for us to change that narrative. It's time for us to do something about it. And we can't do anything about it if we are not at least taking stock of the previous generation and what they did, and begin to ask ourselves if they did this, and if it has not delivered any result, and if we continue on this same path, we will likely end the same and more in a more deteriorating state than they ended. And for us not to reduplicate that, for the sake of your generation unborn, for the ones that you have introduced on earth already, you have to alter the matrix. You have to do something differently that would begin to alter that process. Eventually, that will get us to the destination. So I'm going to suggest one of the ways you can alter that is to join a revolutionary political party or movement. Is to begin to do something about it. Your parents, they sold the idea that policy is dirty man's game, that God does not want them in politics. But politics then affect everything they have to do. Politics has affected your prayer point. In case you don't know, there was a time people were not as praying for what to eat the way we pray now. Children were allowed to be children. Children will play that God bless my mom. Now, children are no longer praying God bless my mom because he has to eat. Children are now praying God provide for me because children are now orphans. They are now on the street. They are homeless. That is how religion has gotten us to, right? Our politics has affected our lives that much. So it's politics we need to address. The problem is not somebody doing you. The person that is doing you is probably also experiencing another doing, and the doing of that person is the government. If you can address the government, if you can create social political space that enables us to thrive as a person, as a people, and as a nation, and as a continent, we will thrive. So join a political, revolutionary political movement. Two, I can suggest a movement of the people, MOP, AAC, Action, AAC, I've forgotten the full acronym, but you can join AAC, or the movement of the people. Join it now. Organize. Do differently from what your parents did, so that you will not end up this exact way. If you ask me, if you do the exact thing, there is no God that can deliver you from it until you end exactly. And it's in the same pit that we are all in. So do something different today to change the result for tomorrow.